Welcome back, everyone. This is number 3 in the series, and actually the final webinar in this series where we cover digital marketing for business-to-business software companies. In the first 2 installments of the series, we discussed activities that had to do with the customer journey that were pre-sales, really part of the acquisition journey. So everything to do with awareness, driving top of the funnel activities all the way to accelerating the sales cycle to finally commitment. Today we're going to focus on the retention piece. And this has become more and more of a focal point for today's software companies because as we've discussed in previous webinars, many of the software companies that are in the B2B space have products now or are rolling out products that are subscription-based. And as we know, not unlike what has been experienced in the telco industry, it's easy for people to switch. The notion of churn and switching costs are now becoming common vernacular for people in the software industry, where previously those items were only found in various select industries. So the role of the marketer, the digital marketer particularly, is evolving and actually expanding, particularly for software companies. It's not just about acquisition anymore. It's not just about that first sale. Because now you have to sell yourself on a continuous basis. You need to stay top of mind continually. You need to continually build that brand and get that affinity from the customer throughout their life cycle with your organization. So today we're going to cover 3 areas. One, which we call after-sales demand generation. So typically we understand demand generation as being something that drives that initial sale. That often is cross-channel, may involve web, email, social components that drive demand that eventually leads us to a sale. In this situation, after-sales demand generation, we're looking at what it takes, first of all, to get a person to expand their, kind of get their share of wallet and expand their wallet with you from maybe additional modules that you have for sale or upgrading them to the next level of your subscription service, whatever that may be. But this truly is after-sales demand generation. It's about getting greater sales revenue out of those existing customers. The other is after-sales engagement. Now, we had a discussion last week in the last webinar around pre-sales engagement, where we were focused on providing the digital equivalent of a pre-sales support, a pre-sales engineer that would typically go on site and help accelerate that sales process by answering questions and so on. In this situation, after-sales engagement is really to keep people engaged while they're customers. You know, uncovering new capabilities within the software that they may not have been aware of, helping them understand how they squeeze out more value for their business. And so there's a lot of opportunity to create and engender more affinity for your product and your brand through after-sales engagement. And again, this is to curb the notion of churn. And then finally, of course, support. You know, there's clearly some strong statistics around the fact that support has a huge impact around whether or not people stay with the company, what their support experience was. And I believe we have a great opportunity from a digital perspective to shape that support experience before they even pick up the phone. So today we're going to take a look at these 3 areas, and we're going to go through them fairly quickly. We will probably have some follow-up webinars around some of these areas as we dig into them, particularly support. So today is a quick walkthrough of these three areas, which we think are very important. So we all know that, common knowledge is that acquiring a new customer costs 6 to 7 times more than retaining an existing one. And for us, once we have that new customer, we should think about how to leverage that into greater revenue for ourselves. So where do we start with after-sales demand generation? Well, really, this is honestly once they've had a chance to use the product after they've purchased it. And if we go back to the life cycle, kind of the buying cycle of a person, once they've made that commitment, then they typically will spend some time with that product to get it stood up. They'll have some support questions and so on. And then they finally operationalize that product and kind of integrate it into their day-to-day business. At that point, they're beginning to realize value out of that product, and now we can begin to re-engage them by moving them into either other additional modules that may be aligned with some of their business needs from a line of business perspective, or maybe move them up if you are a subscription, move them up into a different subscription level. And so this approach, if we have enough back-end information, transactional information otherwise, it doesn't matter if it was a premise-based piece of software or a subscription-based piece of software, the approach that we would take here to upsell and cross-sell, kind of move up the ladder to drive more revenue, remains the same. And digital becomes a big part of that opportunity for us to do that from an after-sales revenue generation perspective. Traditionally, after-sales revenue was either handled by the salesperson or the account person. Might be a person that walks in the door. I used to work for a large software company on the East Coast, and we had named accounts, and so we were out there engaging with people, flying around my territory, engaging with people to mainly extend their service contracts and things like that. And it provided an understanding of how this large software company actually made money. And the bulk of their money was made off of the after-sales support, after-sales maintenance, and kind of those longer-term engagements they had with people. So there's that face-to-face possibility of getting that. But many other software companies now are relying on both customer service and the support organization to drive some of the after-sales revenue. And so these are really some of the traditional ways of software companies delivering revenue once that initial purchase has been made. But if we think of it from a digital perspective, there's a lot of things that we can do. But the first step in that is really understanding our customer. So I mentioned transactional information. If we know what version of software they have, we know what modules they've already purchased, and what business they're in, what problems they may have, which can be informed by information captured on the CRM. It might be information that's captured through social. So in this case, we're looking at a dashboard that begins to kind of roll up some of the social aspects. People are spending time in your private community or out on your Facebook page, and they're talking about some of the needs they have and some of the problems they'd like for your organization to solve. You begin to shape how you might engage with them as a marketer to drive that next opportunity for after sales. The other thing is no different than when we do pre-sales demand generation, where we begin to look at doing nurturing campaigns through a marketing automation system, where we drive people back to landing pages and get them to engage with calls to action. That actually should not in any way stop once that initial sale is made. The same mechanisms that we reach that initial sales with are fully applicable to after sales. So for instance, if your company is coming out with a new product, that is tangentially related to the current product that a customer has. Being able to create demand for that product before it's released within the customer base, creating some excitement around that, and actually getting that demand up there by the time the product is released, you have the opportunity of actually moving some SKUs out the door or getting that subscription fairly quickly. So it's really about doing that ongoing engagement through nurturing. And one of the things we want to do is also, think about what it takes to understand the customer so we can begin to personalize that. We'll talk a little bit about that as we talk about engagement. Some of the key takeaways here, again, it's no different than when we first do that initial engagement from a pre-sales perspective. We really need to understand our customer. Fortunately, once they've engaged with us, that should become a lot easier. We may have started with segmentation and we begin to understand their role and all of those things. Now you actually know the customer. They're in your CRM. They're probably in your marketing automation system. You may have had a salesperson that's engaged them, a customer service person that's engaged them. They log into your customer portal. If they're a subscription-based customer, they log into their application. You can understand where they're spending their time and what they're trying to do. It really gives you a leg up over the competition. And it's a matter of leveraging that knowledge to really begin to kind of remarket to them kind of that next level of opportunity. And again, using that to shape the messaging around what they need and leveraging the same tools. The message may be different, but the tools remain the same. The practices actually remain the same as well. Again, we do the analysis, we shape the messaging from a content strategy perspective, and then we leverage the tools from a cross-channel perspective to get the messages to them where they spend their time. So now moving to after-sales engagement. So how is this different than after-sales demand generation? Well, after-sales engagement is focused more on keeping people engaged with you and your brand and really beginning to get them to become a bigger advocate of your organization, of your product. And the value there is, of course, to reduce the switching or the churn and for them to, from an advocation perspective, help them drive more word-of-mouth business to your organization. Churn right now is becoming a more obvious thing within the industry in software. Roughly 70% of SaaS companies, and this was a survey done by a venture capital firm, have an annual churn of less than 10%, and 75% of those have a churn of under 5%. But what we can see is that even some churn can really impact your business. If you're able to reduce churn and get kind of a neutral growth just by adding new customers, you can see the difference where if you had a 2.5% churn or a 5% churn over a period of 5 years, it makes a big difference in terms of the amount of monthly recurring revenue that you would see. If, for instance, you can kind of flip that churn around and also focus on what they call expansion bookings. This goes back to the discussion that we had around demand generation. It's where we begin to take the existing customer and actually generate more revenue. You can see how much difference that makes as you begin to grow the company over 5 years, is really driving up that monthly recurring revenue stream. So this is just a simple, model. Again, developed by a gentleman. His name is David Sloss. You can find him online. He writes a blog called For Entrepreneurs, and I think it was a great example of how we can begin to think about how churn begins to impact the new generation of software companies and even some of the traditional companies that are out there that are looking to release subscription-based software. So what do we do about this? Well, one of the things that we want to look at is how we begin to personalize that engagement. And we use, again, all the different channels that we've used before, but there's some really great tools that are starting to emerge that help us to develop that deeper engagement. And I'm going to bring a few of these up. And we at eDynamic are beginning to talk to some of these companies. It's pretty exciting. And one of the things that we firmly believe in from an engagement perspective is that personalization, the alignment of content and messaging and the overall experience is what can really differentiate kind of the best of class companies from the also-rans that are out there. The majority of web content is generic, and we can all agree to that. I mean, we write content because we have, in a generic sense, because we have a limited amount of time, and sometimes we have not even taken the time to go through the true content strategy yet, where we begin to do that segmentation and real, more precise messaging, if you will. But as we move forward, that becomes a more critical part of differentiating your company amongst all the other competitors that are out there. And when it comes to engagement, creating that personal relationship from an online perspective becomes as important as creating that personal relationship offline when you've got that customer service person responding to a request, for example. So looking at some of the tools that are out there, this is an example of a company called Insightera. And they provide a very well-integrated set of solutions to help drive personalized content across a variety of different platforms. You might notice that they have a CMS plugin on the left side. They've got CRM, marketing automation platform plugin. So they're hitting what we call the trifecta, the three big applications that digital marketers are typically working with. In addition, they allow you to pull in information from outside sources, let's say Experian, or if you're leaning more toward the consumer side of the house, or some of the other tools that are out there. Machine learning and big data, so they've got some analytics in the background to look for patterns. And they begin to provide the capabilities around some of the kind of future-facing tools like predictive analytics and predictive capabilities to help define what is that next best call to action, for example. So it's well worth taking a look at some of these companies, Lattice Engines, Insightera, and there's a few others out there that really can provide a cross-channel engagement that becomes personalized. In terms of additional discussion, when we talk about cross-channel, email and web definitely go hand in hand. And we need to begin to think about that, including social at some point in time. But email and web personalization is something that's fairly easily done today. If you do have a contemporary marketing automation system, a contemporary content management system, that becomes fairly straightforward. We see with some of the tools coming out by folks like Lattice Engines and Insightera, helping to drive and kind of coalesce the approach that people take across these platforms. Social engagement, of course, becomes another big part, as we talked before, you know, being where people are. I have walked into organizations, particularly kind of newer, younger organizations, where they've got their big monitors up there, and everyone's got their Facebook page up there. So while they're doing work, their Facebook page is always up. That's part of the company policy. It's how people work. It's how they engage. Facebook becomes as big a way of engaging with web and web content and people as Google does for many people. So making sure that we reach people where they're at the moment becomes very important. So we need to get coverage across the social networks that are out there, and understanding where people are spending their time really can be done through a lot of the analytics tools that are out there as well, like Sprout Social, we'll talk about that in a moment, Hootsuite, and a variety of other platforms. Coming back to private communities, I think one of the biggest opportunities that software companies have for engagement and to drive kind of this coalescence of people towards a brand, developing that affinity, and developing relationships is through a private community. This is where people can be opened. This is where people can become champions, and you can badge them and grow them up through the community. This is where you have community managers that cultivate various threads of discussion. And it becomes truly a place where a lot of organizations gain visibility into new product features, gain visibility into problems and patterns of problems that are emerging. And with that insight, be able to address that immediately within the community, but then put a plan in place to address that more broadly, both from a digital communications perspective and then perhaps from an operational perspective behind the scenes. So we're a big fan of implementing private communities for software companies particularly, as well as other high-tech companies where there is a group of people working together around a specific piece of software or tool. So some of the takeaways, again, it's about understanding your customer. If we can, again, implement that analytics and provide the insight, I think that begins to help shape the messaging. I think cross-channel, including social, becomes a very important part of this. And we want to keep people engaged with the brand as much as we do with the product. The outcome here is a reduced churn. And going back to the charts that we have, just a very simple model, if you can reduce churn, cost of sales goes down, your focus in the money that you spend on sales is to driving new customers that can, again, drive more revenue. And then, of course, your monthly recurring MRR will go up much more significantly if we can reduce churn. Now we're going to take a quick look at support. Support is something we've touched before. It definitely touches on some of the pre-sales engagement activities, particularly when people are evaluating your product. And what we want to do is make sure that, as much of the pre-sales engagement from a support perspective gets carried over also in after sales. And there it becomes even more so. And again, we're talking about churn where people get potentially frustrated with the support that they're not getting. Maybe it's too difficult. There may be a lot of barriers to getting the answers that they're looking for. Again, some of the things that we brought up before around support, starting with search, making it very obvious. And one of the other things that we've done with other companies is that we can begin to leverage personalization. This might be profile knowledge that we have of the customer at this point and transactional knowledge that we have of the customer to begin to shape the support experience, where even things like results from search become focused on in and around the products that they have or the modules that they have, rather than providing kind of the unabridged view of all the information. We begin to shape that already. So there's a lot of opportunities to leverage some of these tools that we use from engagement in the support activities. So again, thinking about making support really a make or break experience. There's a lot of evidence that supports that that poor support experiences really can impact how long an organization or people stay with the brand. And we want to make sure that that becomes a very important part of the overall digital experience. And this is why we go back to talking about how the digital marketer really owns the experience, whether that's support, whether that's demand generation across the entire customer life cycle. And the support organization may own the content, may own the response to that, but that whole experience on the front end belongs in the realm of the digital marketer. So we have seen that time and time again as an important part. So as I said before, this would be a shorter webinar. We wanted to cover a couple key points and bring up some considerations. We appreciate your time in following us on this series, this three-part series, and it's available on our website. And we will be coming up with some more webinars in and around software companies specifically as we drill into some of these areas. So again, thank you very much. And I'm going to turn this back over to Kamya or Anirban, and let's see if we have any questions from the audience.
Yeah, hi Rolf. We have a few questions coming up. The first one will be, to what extent is it possible to track prospects' social behavior in order to provide personalized content?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of tools out there that exist and are emerging around social analytics that provide insight as to where people are spending their time, but also what people are saying and what the sentiment is around what people are saying. So I had mentioned earlier tools like Hootsuite, which provides some analytics. It provides other things as well. Sprout Social is another example. And then you can look toward some of the other more fully integrated solutions like Adobe's solution that will basically take in information from some of these other platforms as well as have some capabilities around social analytics. At this point, there's so much information that might come from these systems. There's no kind of standard way of using that to drive personalization. And I think it'll be probably a few years out before that kind of becomes standardized because some of this stuff is still so new. And I think a lot of the personalization that we are able to do now really is based on the interactions that we have on the web, the responses we get in email, and the insights that we might get from some of these social analytics systems, not directly influencing personalization, but guiding us from a content strategy perspective. So.
All right, we have another question. Can we have all website pages and campaign landing pages templates, both present and future, mobile optimized with one-time effort?
I think we're definitely heading that way. Mobile optimization, I think, goes back to the key tenets that we communicate with our customers around, be where your customer's at, allow them to engage with you the way they want to engage with you, tell them what they want to hear, align with them from a messaging perspective. And clearly, mobile, as we know, kind of crossed that 50% mark earlier this year in terms of all web traffic going to mobile devices. So that's a big biggie, period. I mean, we need to support mobile. The nice thing is there are a variety of technologies that are emerging right now and are relatively robust and mature that enable you to develop cross-device experiences. And I say that not about mobile because it's not about mobile anymore. Mobile was kind of table stakes for last year. This year, clearly, tablet has become the new table stakes. I mean, it's a fundamental thing that we recognize we need to support small devices like smartphones. We need to support the variety of tablets that come in a variety of sizes, all the way up to the large screens where the person has a 1920 by 1080 screen. So how do we do that? How do we be able to cater to all those people? Well, we look toward these frameworks that are out there. There are two particular frameworks, plus many others, that are in vogue with a lot of web development shops, per se. We use them as well. One of them is called Bootstrap. It was actually developed by Twitter and is a public domain framework that we can build websites in. It defines both HTML5 constructs and CSS3 that enables you to very elegantly build websites that work on large screen devices, mid-screen devices, and small devices, using the same content and kind of both shrinking things but also reducing the amount of content that's on the page and simplifying the experience. So there's Twitter's Bootstrap. There's also something called Zurb Foundation that's out there, and both are great platforms. And there's a variety of other tools that are out there that are emerging as well.
All right. Rolf, there are a few questions, but I think we'll get back to them after the webinar. At this note, we'll have to end this webinar, and I would like to thank everyone for attending our webinar. We hope you found it informative. The recording for today's webinar will be available on our website within the next 3 business days. We'll also be sharing the webcast URL with all the attendees via email. Please feel free to reach out to us at contact@edynamic.net for any further questions you might have. Thank you once again. Thank you, Rolf.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.